Living in Virginia, you're in the fast lane on the information superhighway. We've invested $3 billion in Virginia's broadband network to give you one of the fastest internet connection speeds in the world, so you can build relationships, bring new business to our state, and meet the future of education. It's amazing what we can do together. Visit VCTA.com to learn how broadband connects the Commonwealth.
From the General Assembly and the City of Richmond, I'm Woody Evans for Cable Reports, brought to you by the Virginia Cable Telecommunications Association and Cox Communications, connecting Virginians to their government. We're so pleased to have Delegate Vivian Watts with us today. Good to see you.
Good morning, Woody.
I want to ask you, in your wildest dreams, did you anticipate that the Democrats would have 15 new members in the House of Delegates?
In all honesty, I knew we had extremely good candidates as I worked with them, but I was hoping for about 7 so that we would move committees from only having 7 members up to as many as 9 members. But it was turnout, turnout, turnout. So often people do not really focus on how important state issues are, and they're looking just at national news. And this was a quantum difference in people realizing 90% of what affects their daily lives is the state legislative public policy challenges. So turnout, wonderful. Hopefully it'll be sustained.
And of course, it'll be a year pretty soon that the Women's March on Washington occurred. Now,
that
had a big difference.
Huge difference. That was a huge difference. And also, Woody, hopefully I will be able to convey this accurately as I've talked, particularly with some of my male colleagues and voters, that the Me Too movement is not just about sexual harassment. It is about women being defined and controlled and objectified, which gets in the way of their being able to fully utilize their professional training, their talents, their interests into a no-win situation, being controlled by a male power structure. And the Weinstein thing began coming out about 5 or 6 weeks before the election. And I also think that that was a growing tide of a feeling in the gut that this is wrong, that we should not have this huge burden in our professional and human development as women.
And then we had the Senate race in Alabama, which highlighted that issue among others as well.
Absolutely, yeah. And it's very real. I do have a bill which I don't have a hidden agenda on it, but just I've been at this for 26 years, just discovered recently that with the swearing in on Wednesday, I am the longest serving woman in the House of Delegates. There are 2 senators, Janet Howell and Louise Lucas, who meet that same mark on the Senate side. But having said that, I've seen it all. So I have a bill in on developing a workplace harassment policy, which is, of course, is far more than just sex. It's ethnicity, it is gender preference, etc. But following the best practices, not with a hidden agenda that I'm going after something.
Right.
Again, I've seen it all, but
Right.
making sure that we have open processes so that individuals know how to bring these issues forward and get resolution. Usually also that becomes very preventative along with training, so that there is that respect for each other as human beings, and particularly for the General Assembly, that there are moments when people don't realize what a power relationship you have over an advocate who's coming to you. Or I recognize from my first 2 years down here, just as an intern, as a AA for Delegate Dorothy McDermott, who up until Wednesday had been the longest serving, rose to be chairman of Appropriations Committee. She was my mentor, really wanted me down here. But realizing in those 2 years when she had me down here, how I would handle my balance of family and these responsibilities, that once I was elected, I had the protection of a title, Delegate Watts. So I am particularly sensitive to interns and LAs and everyone who's part of the General Assembly as to their protection as well and what are the right lines of communication. Forgive me for one more comment that I think is important to make. As I've been working on getting the best possible policy structured, it's surprising how many people are not aware that as a manager in the workplace, if you're aware of a harassment situation and don't do anything about it, you are equally guilty. So if a member is informed of something that their intern might be enduring and doesn't do anything about it by whoever is the perpetrator, then, and that responsibility, I think, needs to be clearly out there, because I know that most will take it on and they're in the position to protect that person.
You know, that's kind of interesting because
use the power for good.
Absolutely. It's the same kind of standard, if you will, that relates to abused and neglected children. There's a mandatory requirement to report things if you're in a certain position to do so. And
as you're aware, for 7 years I was director of the Fairfax County program for the most severe cases of child abuse, neglect, the CASA program.
Talk to us about how do you maintain this momentum, because we've had this election recently, but of course next year there's going to be there are going to be elections at the national level in terms of Congress. There will be other elections. How do you maintain the momentum? How do you keep people excited? How do you get those voters to turn out once more?
Again, it's turnout, turnout, turnout. What I have been advising the new members is that your re-election started yesterday. And for me, it has always been voter contact. The voters have to trust you. They have to believe that you will come to where they live, that you will understand programs for intellectually and developmentally disabled, that you will visit the small business work sites, that you will help clean up, in my case, the Acatink Creek, that you are hands-on understanding their lives and problems. And that kind of personal loyalty is what the core turnout is all about. You don't reach that through ads and mailers and so on. That is something that people have to care to turn out for you. This last election may have been more of a cause election, as we just discussed. And the sustaining that has to become the personal delivery of someone who cares about the people they represent.
Now, what about the power relationship that still exists here within the General Assembly? Do you see any changes yet?
There have been some changes because only Delegate Ken Plum and I go back to the days of 1998 when the shift in power had occurred before. And so I tend to be a bit of a nerd. I'm a night person, so I just sit there at my desk and work on all these things. So I did extensive work to look back into the journals of the time to see just how much controversy there was, what we had to be prepared for, what the rule changes were at that time, and how they've evolved in the 18 years since. I wish we had made more progress in our power sharing in this session. I would, because it is more reflective of what the voters message. But under the power sharing, we're still under a proportionment of committees that reflects in words what the makeup of the House is, but mathematically, it's always rounded up to the advantage of the majority party. So only if you had 50-50 would committees be 11-11. 22-member committees.
Right.
But as soon as you go to 51-49, it becomes 12-10.
I see.
Quite a big spread
Yes.
for what is just a one-vote difference. So we had made proposals to have committees be 23, so that it's at least 12-11, and that being over up to 48-52 spread. I'm now getting into too much math, but it is the kind of hard, specific analysis so that you're really looking at how these words play out in the actual composition of committees to represent what the voters had said during the election. We did make progress in more transparency as far as subcommittee votes. We had hoped that we would also be able to get subcommittees be an odd number, so that instead of the potential of the ratio rounding up to 4-2, which is not really representative at all, we would at least be at 3-5. Excuse me, I've just done 4-5, so that it's much closer to the actual representation that the voters chose.
Now, that transparency also relates to the fact that citizens can now access by streaming video the committee meetings.
Absolutely. And you may have noticed, Woody, I tend to be fairly expressive when I talk, so it's going to be interesting. There's going to be some freeze frame pictures of me in committee, scowling, I'm sure, that may come back to haunt me.
Now, there were two anomalies that occurred within weeks of the General Assembly convening, one in the Hampton Roads area, the other one in Stafford and Fredericksburg. One resulted in picking a name out of a hat. The other one, there was an attempted court intervention which failed, but there's still a huge issue there. There's still a huge issue in terms of what happened in the Hampton Roads area.
Well stated. And these are major issues. They're not just issues about whether it's a Republican or Democrat that is elected, but they are serious questions about procedure. In the case of the Newport News, they draw out of the hat the fact that when we have a recount and everybody has signed off on the due processes that are carefully spelled out of how that recount is conducted, to come back the next morning just on the basis of, well, I'm a little uncomfortable and I'd like to take a look at this ballot, is just such a really disturbing precedent that we don't have finality in our recounts when that's critically important in these close elections. So that is a serious problem. We did challenge the verbal determinations with a 100-page brief showing the Department of Elections guidance on these types of ballots. It should
because
not
I
have been
always
counted.
thought if you voted for more than one person, that was considered an overvote and should not be counted.
Should not have been counted. And but unfortunately, the judges did not review and change their ruling. But then the Fredericksburg has a much deeper roots, and I'm going to use the word tentacles. What happened in Fredericksburg, where you didn't know which side of the line certain voters lived on and where they were given the wrong ballot, is a direct result of the redistricting of 2011, which the U.S. Supreme Court said had to be redone and sent back to the federal district court. I don't know what their actions are going to be, but the reason the Supreme Court acted was that that redistricting to gerrymander, putting as many blacks into black districts as possible so that there was no influence in other districts, was conducted on the basis of plus or minus 1% population deviation, allowing just little pockets to make up, and a 1% is 800 in a house rate, in a house district. Little pockets moved over into the black districts, but statewide, applying it statewide so that you could say, well, we didn't do it just for the black districts. We were just trying to be as accurate as possible. We doubled the number of split precincts. And that's exactly what happened in Fredericksburg. 4 of my 20 precincts are split. Tremendous voter confusion. How can they hold me accountable if they don't even know which side of the line they live on? And when I talk about lines, the worst one is a subdivision of over 1,000 homes, where 60 homes are cut off into another district. And they're cut off by this side of the street until you get to this court, and then both sides of the street, and then that 5 different twists and turns to draw that line. And when you think of going out with your GPS, and occasionally I have been misdirected, and that's exactly what's happening statewide in hundreds of precincts of trying to decide, okay, if it's this side of the court, then it's both sides of the street. Well, is it the house that starts as the court begins on the other side of the street, across from, up from? Which house is it? All of that is tremendously technically challenging, as well as being very subject to human error. It's a very disturbing ramification of the tool used to gerrymander in the 2011 elections.
And of course, 2020 will be here before we know it, so those issues have to be addressed. But then the issues surrounding the formation, hopefully, of some bipartisan way of accomplishing redistricting.
Absolutely. We have had the Democratic caucus has had bills in since 2002 on either a constitutional amendment or a commission, but something to address that bipartisan need to start in advance to have very rational discussions about where these lines need to be drawn. They've never even gotten out of subcommittee, so hopefully the changes that we talked about as far as transparency of subcommittees being filmed, subcommittee votes being on record, will break that, and we will have that sort of commission established. But also, just one other quick thing, I have a bill in that says no split precincts. We have had that on the books for years, saying to localities you can't split precincts to elect your local school board and governing body. So this says, well, if we're telling the localities to do it, we ought to go by that same rule.
And of course, what's interesting about the redistricting issue is it shouldn't be a partisan issue.
Shouldn't
because both parties, if you look at Maryland, the Democrats over there have controlled because of gerrymandering, and of course here the Republicans have over a number of years. So,
and again, it's confusing to the voters when you do this kind of. My district looks compact, but I have parts of 6 different high schools. We have 10 local government official magisterial districts. I have parts of 4 of them, and in my large county, senators don't have that kind of spread. So that there's no community that really focuses that I can go out and not just speak to, but be exposed to, answer the questions. And I grew up in a rural area, never saw an elected official growing up, and I've always had a mission that if I'm ever invited into a high school, by God, I'm going to do everything I can to clear my calendar, just so that the kids can see that this is a real person and that it's open to them if, as their life progresses, it becomes the right thing for them to do to step in.
Right. What about making it easier to vote, even for seniors, for example? You still have to fill out an application. You still have to state a reason, and they're very limited reasons. You have to send that in. Then you get a ballot, which you have to submit.
There's a number of bills in on early no-excuse voting, and that's really the direction to go, because 17 different excuses, I think, says it all. There's so many reasons to legitimately vote absentee, so let's do away with all of this unnecessary delay and confusion and difficulty in doing so.
And of course, the right for a felon who has served his or her time to vote is something else that still needs to be addressed. It's still done on a case-by-case basis. The last two governors have done an excellent
last
job
two,
in that
yes.
regard, but there needs to be a change in the law there as well.
So that we're in line with the rest of the states. Almost all of the other states, your rights are restored as soon as you have done your full sentence. For some states, they're not even taken away. Quite frankly, Woody, I think you're aware, this is still a incredible tie to
Well, Jim Crow, mass incarceration.
1900s, there were three ways that they were going to limit the black vote. One of them was going to be the poll tax, and we've done away with the poll tax. I'm just blocking on the second one that we've also done away with, but this one was the third leg in the stool that, okay, it's going to be real easy to, for those who can vote now,
right.
a little felony charge, and you've lost your right to vote forever.
Right. Transportation is still near and dear to your heart. You were a transportation secretary for a period of time before you returned to the General Assembly, and I know Metro funding is still a huge issue, and that will involve the cooperation of Virginia, Maryland, and the District of Columbia. What's going on there?
A lot of work behind the scenes because the complexity is great as far as what Metro ideally would like, and I say this fondly, the guys and gals in the suits in the 20-story building think, oh, well, like every other transit system in the United States has a dedicated source of revenue that is in that region. Well, our region is over 2 states plus the District of Columbia. Nobody else has that challenge. So you cannot constitutionally just take our money and pledge it on this side of on the other side of the border. In addition, we have the problem in the tremendous work that was done that finally culminated in 2013 to establish a solid source of regional funding that is raised and controlled regionally. That was I'm going to say so well crafted that the bond rating houses gave the Northern Virginia Transportation Authority the top bond rating for authorities, which is AA+. Because you're an authority, you can never be a AAA.
Right.
Top rating, right out of the gate. And so if we on the state level begin directing that local decision, the bond ratings houses take a real look, very concerned about it. So we have to be in control of the bonding power of a stable and reliable source. We can't just transfer that to a multi-state authority. There are also, of course, I am very determined to keep to the precedent, which is long-standing, that the state has always paid a share of metro costs, nowhere near the share of Maryland, but they've always recognized what an important part of the state's economic engine that Metro serves. Last I looked at it, we have 22 Fortune 500 corporate headquarters in Virginia. 11 of them are served by Metro.
Wow, 11, half of them.
11.
Wow.
And so they're bringing that workforce here. They have decided to locate and in that area and with Metro being a very important part of the workplace infrastructure that supports this kind of economy. And what it says also to anybody else who wants to locate in Virginia, we have 22 Fortune 500 corporate headquarters. This is a place for you to be as well.
Now I understand that because of the myriad of problems Metro has suffered from over the last 10 years, ridership has gone down dramatically. That source of revenue has gone down dramatically, those fares.
And until we get back to good, which is the phrase used, that becomes a serious problem. And when I talk about back to good, about a year and a half ago, I took a tour of some of the safe track work that was being done. And the one thing that got to me more than anything was, a railroad tie is designed so that you keep rails in exact alignment so that you not only have a smooth ride, but a safe ride. Those pieces of wood are 40 years old.
They're that old.
That old. They
Wow.
have not been replaced. And this is also bespeaks, though, the challenge that we have in the governance of Metro, because as it's split between the jurisdictions, there's been not enough accountability for the necessity to have serious ongoing maintenance, and that's what we're trying to fund is a 20-year plan of significant infrastructure improvements and preservation.
So how have the public-private partnerships in your view worked out with the high occupancy toll lanes?
Well, first of all, I have to say, no matter what, it is the riders of these lanes that pay for them, no matter how you structure them, how you bond them, how you finance them. And so as we look at those potentials, and I'm in the heart of 2 of them and then have kept abreast with 66, what they have become a tool for dynamic tolling to maximize the number of people using these corridors by making all transit, express buses, carpools, van pools free. And with that, if you're guaranteed then that you'll have around 50 miles an hour, not anything under 45, you will then take the incentive to put more people in fewer vehicles, all the while leaving an option that people do use, not usually daily, but if you're late picking up your kid, it's cheaper to pay the dynamic toll than the fine for your child not being picked up from daycare. So it provides options, 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 and that's really the bottom line of what we're trying to do.
Now, what about the scoring mechanism that's been used over the past few years to determine where transportation funding goes?
I think it's had excellent results. It's a very good initiative, although right now I'm also trying to make sure that we have an open dialogue about scoring any investments in Metro, not just in any transportation improvement, to really look at whether or not an up-to-date rail car that can be on the track closer to the train ahead of it, therefore we can increase our number of trains going, that increases capacity. So the scoring system has to be sophisticated to apply appropriately to the options that I was referring to move the maximum number of people as fast as possible in these corridors.
Of course, one of the governor's priorities this year is Medicaid expansion. What do you think the prospect for success this time around may be?
It is such a serious economic loss to Virginia. Let's just start there. The billions of dollars that have gone to other states that we have paid in the taxes that support the Medicaid expansion. Then you have the 400,000 people minimum who are not covered in basic health insurance. 70% of those people are in a household where there's someone employed. So it's not as if these are hardworking people, they have no health insurance. And just for the record, there is absolutely nobody in it that there's any question about legal status. So anybody who is not a citizen resident of Virginia is not included. I had to look at that closely, and we've always erred on the other side when we're estimating. So we need to do it. The healthcare needs, preventative healthcare, extremely important. A ridiculous loss of money.
Great. Thank you for being here, Delegate Vivian Watts. Good to see you.
Always my pleasure.
Thank you for watching Cable Reports, brought to you by the Virginia Cable Telecommunications Association and Cox Communications. Until next time, I'm Woody Evans.